You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by
Tracy McMillan from Nelson Nygaard.
And Chrissy Mancini Nichols.
How are you all doing?
Good.
Are you too dry? Are you too wet? Are you like on one side or the other? Or are you too cold? Are you too warm? We should start with the weather, of course.
Chrissy, I'll let you start with that because you all are experiencing weather.
Yes, we have weather. It's wet and cold in San Francisco and most of Northern California. But yeah, it's this mix of we need the rain, but then there's flooding and burn scars. And, we have to deal with the consequences of all the other environmental impacts that the rain brings. It's strange not to look out and to see sun or fog.
That's the norm.
Well, we had rain last week in Arizona, Thursday night in the valley, and that was nice. It had been the first time we'd had rain in quite some time since the summer, and it came down hard and fast. So we had a little bit of flooding too.
Well, so this is the last episode of the year, and we're
all here.
And we're all here, which I'm super excited about. I'm glad to have everybody here. I'm drinking some eggnog out of the Solo cup because Han Solo had to join us as well. So, he's been here for most of the year with a lot of shows, but I'm glad to have everybody, including Han, here on the show for the last episode, which is episode. What's
A toast to you, Han.
A toast to Han. This is episode 102. We're in session. I want to go through the little spiel I got, and then let's get to the news because we got a lot of things to cover today. Before we get to the show, I want to let folks know that they can get this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, including iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, and of course, Apple Podcasts when they're working. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and subscribing means you get both Mondays at the Overhead Wire and Talking Headways on the same feed. 2 fun podcasts, 1 great channel, and thanks for everybody who subscribes through podcatchers. Okay, let's get to the news. Here are a few of the stories that piqued our interest from the newsletter over the last few weeks. Let's see here. Let's start with e-commerce. Are you all good with that? The sustainability of e-commerce. The entire supply chain of everything we consume makes up 50% of worldwide emissions, but a question arises about whether increases in e-commerce also increase emissions. Research done before the pandemic says online shopping is often more sustainable than going to brick and mortar stores, but changes to determining variables such as packaging, number of trips to the store, or the efficiency of delivery could shift the answer considerably. This was by Catherine Boudreau at Politico. So the first thing I'll say about this article was that Catherine did a really good job of this with the stats. There's a lot of statistics in this article, good or bad.
And converging statistics.
Yeah, and stuff that didn't, it doesn't quite match up, right? It's and then the other thing that kind of frustrated, one thing, that was a good part of it. The bad thing was that I feel like a lot of the studies and a lot of the considerations about this assumes you drive everywhere. It assumes like the consumer themselves drives everywhere. So, for example, when you're talking about emissions from deliveries and such, I know that for me, who walk to the store every day, or not every day. That's another thing I had a weird thing with, was the average amount of times that people went to the store every year, which was one of the stats. But for somebody who walks to the store, once a week or so, I feel like, or even the farmer's market once every other week or so, I feel like a lot of the statistics didn't consider like urban areas. But I don't know if you all thought about kind of some of the statistics, some of the ideas in the article, thinking about waste as it pertains to e-commerce.
I think that's a good point because I would say for most trips, I walk, but I think we live in a place where we have that luxury,
right? And
not many people do, even within cities like San Francisco, New York, or others. Not everyone can walk to a grocery store, or butcher, or bookstore. So I think that's maybe one aspect of it. But I think for e-commerce, the overall question is, if e-commerce is growing so frequently, so the stats around e-commerce, it's sales grew by 32% last year. It's now 14% of all retail sales compared to 11% in 2019. So that growth isn't changing, even if brick and mortar sales are growing faster than online sales, because people have gotten used to buying goods online. So what we're trying to deal with is what happens when e-commerce is 20% and 25%. There's going to be all these repercussions for cities. I think that we're starting to deal with, I'm leading a research study that's looking into these issues and the data and the technology and the policy. But when we're talking about prioritizing our right-of-ways and our curbs and thinking about bike lanes and moving people, the conversation just keeps coming back to we need more delivery space. No matter the city, the size, no matter what they're trying to prioritize, it gets back to delivery space. Even in Seattle, which was one of the first cities to start to thinking about prioritizing space at the curb and the right-of-way, prioritizing bike lanes or transit lanes, it didn't matter because delivery trucks were just parking in those places. So they had to go back to, well, if we have a residential building, we need to have delivery space because we need to build around that. So it's the problem we're facing is, one, I like that you point out, Jeff, we need more walkable ways to get our goods, but two, we need to figure out how to plan for more space for these vehicles so that they're not having all these emissions and causing congestion.
Yeah, and I think from the other aspect of the environmental impact, I know when the pandemic started and there was so many things were unknown, and so there was a lot of concern about contact with the surface. Stores essentially banned you bringing in your own bags. And I mean, I've carried my own bag into a store for 20 something years, and it was like, oh my gosh, it was uncomfortable.
It was really hard. It was really hard.
Yeah, it was a very strange experience. I'm like, wow, okay, you're really attached to your bags. I knew that already about myself, but my mind was, okay, X number of bags. I think, and the article touches on this a little bit, that in some cases we were making progress in certain aspects of behavior change to lessen the impact of, say, plastics. The pandemic halted some of that, and hopefully we'll be able to pick up somewhere close to where we left off, though I'm not super confident in that. And I think about plastics a lot. The article talked about plastics, and yes, I hate the amount of cardboard that we're producing and delivering, and it's shocking, but the plastics are what is really concerning to me because of less ability to convert that to something else right now.
Well, that was the crazy part in the statistics category. Cardboard and paper is about 60 to 2/3 or something like that. People, they get recycled, and that's kind of a large amount of recycling. But plastics, it's only like 9% or something. It's really small from the article, anyways. And that was actually kind of alarming when I read that, because you throw all of you see the little like recycling thing at the bottom of the plastic you see, and then you toss it in the bin, and you hope, I guess, that it's actually going to get recycled. Now, I noticed also that from our experience, we try to go out to eat to support local restaurants, but then you have to take it home, and so they have those plastic packages. And I find that we have actually a ton of those. We wash them and then keep them in the house and haven't thrown them out, and they've become useful a certain amount of times. And you end up throwing it away because you have to get rid of grease or something along those lines. I wonder how many people actually just a lot of them kept a lot of that waste in their house from the pandemic. So I know my parents did the same thing. They have packaging that they got for restaurant stuff. And then, a lot of times that restaurants aren't allowed to use something that's biodegradable because of the food safety issues that come along with that too. So there's a lot of different little details that come out of that.
Yeah. Remember the soup peddler, Jeff, in Austin?
Mm-hmm.
Chrissy, this was a business that started in Austin in the early 2000s, and it was a soup delivery company. And then they added bread and full dinners and everything, but it was such a awesome concept. And unique at that point in time, and it was all delivered by bike, so they only delivered to certain zip codes that were available. And originally you could wash the container and put it back out, and then they would be utilizing those again, but based on health codes they had to stop that. And it was a real issue for them because they were like, well, part of this is there's an environmental aspect of what we're doing, but to meet health codes they had to make this compromise.
Well, that gets into where Waste Management said that they've only recycled 13.5% of all their collections last year. And the responsibility of the companies, both the e-commerce and the delivery companies, of doing either setting your boxes out. Like, I don't know if you've ever used Good Eggs in San Francisco, but we get groceries delivered in a box, and then they come and pick up your boxes when you get your next delivery, and they use the boxes again, and they use all the packaging again. All the bags are compostable, or if they even use bags. So it gets to, well, what's the responsibility of these companies to do this? And Amazon certainly isn't doing any of like recycling, or, well, they're not having buybacks, or, I know that they're trying to create packaging that is smaller or uses less materials, but that's probably not going to solve the issue.
The funny part about Amazon too is that like if you nowadays, right, like if you try to order in like a bunch of things at once because you want it all to come in one package because you're trying to reduce the last mile impacts, et cetera, like I would try to wait for a month or something like that and then order like 10 things if I need them, if I can't find them somewhere else. And then they all come in 10 different packages, and you're like, well,
yeah,
I just ordered them all at the same time for the reason of
I've thought a lot about that.
Put them all in the same thing, and then they come in 10 different packages. It's so frustrating.
Well, they're coming from 10 different suppliers. It's not necessarily coming from the warehouse.
That's a whole other issue.
That's the issue. And even retailers, if you buy something online, they're sending them from individual stores. So you're getting, if you order clothes or something else online, it's coming from different stores across the country. So you're not even getting your shipment in one package for, more than just Amazon.
This article also made me think, back in 2000, we lived in Vienna, Austria for 3 months while I was doing a research fellowship. And the first time we went to the grocery store at the, on the street level of our apartment building, we saw people going through the checkout, and then they would be unpacking things at the end of the line to put them in their bag. Because people, like Chrissy, to your point, people were walking, home from the grocery store, or they had their push cart, and they wanted no excess packaging to take up space or for them to have to deal with. And so they had an extra counter that you could do that all at. And then the store had a recycling bin for the cardboard. And it was mostly cardboard and partly plastic, but just watching that whole process unfold, one of the first or second times that we were in the store, it was really fascinating.
Yeah. And I think I've done that. I probably do that all the time. When I'm walking to the grocery store, you get bags and in your bag. Or the best thing now with COVID is you can just, bag it yourself. But you're always kind of readjusting, and in the end, you need less bags when you do it yourself because you're just shoving everything in, so you don't have to carry as much home.
I also find that like debagging it yourself is more efficient from a structural standpoint. I find that oftentimes, I don't know if it's my mind, like my Tetris mind, but I'm tossing stuff in and trying to get it in a certain order so that the structural stuff is at the bottom and then the softer stuff is at the top. But then if somebody else, they're usually standing at the end of the thing, and they'll do it as soon as they get it if you let them. And then you just throw stuff in, and I'm like, this is going to take like more bags than I have.
I'm the crazy lady at the store in so many ways. My family hates going to the store with me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think I would enjoy it, apparently, because I'm the crazy person.
You're embarrassing me. Don't tell them to pack a bag.
Well, that gets to, the packaging thing is another interesting thing from just kind of a regulation standpoint, right? Like thinking about who you need to regulate. Like if you're asking people themselves as individuals to be more sustainable, that's kind of hard if you are getting all this packaging, or if you're buying a Coca-Cola and you're getting a plastic bottle or whatever else, right? It's not like you can buy another Coke with a different packaging. It's all comes in one thing. So it's kind of incumbent on, like Chrissy, like you said, on the companies, but also just like the regulation of those companies to make sure that they are all kind of moving in that direction. Because individuals, as individuals necessarily, we can't do that. We can't make those choices because we're not the ones in the supply chain. We're just at the end of it. One of the things that I've thought about a lot is how do you compel these companies to do the right thing while also like not overtly penalizing them too, because they're making bottom line decisions about this packaging costs 2 cents less, and so if over 1 million packages 2 cents is a lot of money, that type of thing makes a big deal. But if you're a regulator, how do you deal with trying to make sure they're doing the right thing without like getting them mad at you or getting their shareholders mad at you or voters that are their shareholders mad at you, et cetera?
Well, I like the article talks about that policy known as extended producer responsibility. It's just that you're talking about. And it's thinking about the upstream responsibility for XYZ. I mean, you were just talking about, it's not all on the consumer. It's just like putting all of transportation safety on the road user. No, there are other people that are involved. Further upstream, that can reduce the risk and the impact and the probability of this happening. It can, in this case, it can reduce the environmental impact and the burden of dealing with the waste by changing the waste type so that it's more recyclable or it's less in quantity.
Yeah, and I think as consumers, we have to push companies to do that with our choices. And I know that's hard for some people because, if you're on a budget or, you often have to look for maybe the most cost efficient, a sale or whatever, but it's up to consumers to push for that. And I think a lot of companies, I mean, you see it with sneakers or different products, companies are trying, at least marketing themselves as more sustainable. Now, are they totally sustainable in all their practices? Not sure. But I think the more that the consumers push, it has to be a combination of the regulations. But, we have to push these companies to just be more sustainable in their practices.
I totally agree. All right, shall we move on?
Yeah.
A transportation insecurity index. Researchers from the University of Michigan have developed a transportation insecurity checklist similar to one used for food insecurity. Transport insecurity, an inability to move freely because of a lack of resources, is not something a lot of policymakers pay attention to, because while we have data on journeys to work, we don't have data on how many people experience challenges like being fired because they lack transportation access. This was by Amanda Merck in Salud America. I thought this was really fascinating. Actually, this piece specifically was like the second most read piece over the last month, which I was really happy about because it's such an important topic. But basically, researchers from the University of Michigan and others created a tool to explore transportation security modeled after this food security index, and they did it based on interviews with families that were living in poverty. So what did you all think about this index and the kind of the results of it?
So I was writing a survey today about transportation service, and I used some of these questions to start off my survey because I just found that this line of questioning that gets beyond, do you have access to a vehicle? How are you commuting to work? You can really understand transportation insecurity and the effect on people. And, that's what we're trying to do is how do we avoid missing doctor's appointments or that job interview or lack access to a grocery store. And what I like about this type of input is it's so personal, so you can better convince decision makers. You have real data that shows the absolute effects of transportation insecurity more than just a big census tract data. And that's so compelling when you're trying to convince for either a grant application or city council or an agency or whatever it is.
Yeah. Everything that Chrissy said, it's great. Jeff, I think you had included a prior article about this index in, maybe it was a session that I couldn't attend a few weeks ago. And they did just do a webinar about 2 weeks ago on the index itself. I haven't watched it yet. I registered so I could get the recording. But as Chrissy said, it's great. I mean, these are a lot of the questions that we ask when we're doing surveys related to coordinated planning. Amanda does a good job in the article at also pointing out, what we lack in the current sources of data that we use right now, and because really it's all we have and it's affordable and accessible, to talk to people about what transportation choices they make, and it's really bad. It's not really bad. It's very limited data, and most everyone does it because it's already done. It's secondary data, and primary data collection is really important, and it's not invested in.
It's a very, the census is a very narrow, even in transportation, even if you're not thinking about insecurity or access. I mean, if you're trying to do research on where people are going and where they're coming from, I mean, you can't even do a 4-step model. If you like 4-step models, I have an aversion to those too. But even if you're trying to do a basic 4-step model, you can't, the census data is not going to be helpful. Journey to work itself is not helpful. And that's just a function of the census being created in the late 1800s, right? And
I let's think about how the journey to work question is like a total failure in the 2020 census as we're sitting at home during a pandemic.
Exactly.
I mean, we have to just completely scratch that question for 2020. I mean, even the National Household Travel Survey is more extensive, and locations can do add-ons to that, but it's not. I mean, these are great questions, and I mean, to be able to, Chrissy, I had the same thought that, okay, these are the types of questions we ask when we create surveys for coordinated plans, but it would be great to drop in this index, because that's also the type of thing that a tool like this needs to happen, that it needs to be replicated over and over and over again to build up the research base around it.
I think you bring up a good point, Tracy, in that this is really expensive data to get, because I do a lot of surveying, and we're dealing with, the state agency may be pushing for an online survey with 50 questions. Well, that is just not realistic. In most places, you have to go and have events and get surveys, and you need like 10 questions. I recently had to conduct a survey where we were required to have these specific set of questions. The survey was taking people like 40 minutes. There were all these issues with, of course, literacy and different languages, and we had covered all those bases, but it was still so difficult to administer. And what I like about these questions is it's just very personal. It's just understandable. Well, how does transportation in the past 30 days, have you had to reschedule an appointment because of a problem with transportation? People can just answer yes, no, rarely, never. And it really gets to the issue, instead of, do you know, will you use micromobility? That's not going to get us an answer. Most people don't even have experienced micromobility or know what it is. So I think the more we continue to think about and to refine how we get data and the types of data that we need, we can be better advocates for transportation equity and better service.
Yep. So many of our transportation questions are disconnected from most people's realities and also most people's trip purposes. We ask about the journey to work. What about all the other trips we make during a day? Even if you are working, and what if you're not?
Well, I want to go into the kind of some of the topics of the questions, and I don't want to ask the question specifically, but there's because we're thinking about the questions overall, and you all were talking about them. I think that we should share them kind of with the audience. But losing wages because you can't get to work on time, missing doctor appointments because you lack transportation, forgoing spending on essentials like food and medicine because you have to pay a lot to keep your car running, skipping trips like workforce training, education because you have so many transfers. Feeling socially isolated, feeling bad about inconveniencing friends and family, and stress from all those things, just like general stress from all those worries. And even yesterday, there was an article in the Washington Post about people not graduating because they didn't have access to transportation to get to class, and so that's a big loss for folks as well.
We have 2 coordinated plans we're working on right now for agencies where they've asked to include youth, students, which is not the typical vulnerable or target population that's included in coordinated planning, which is usually older adults, people with disabilities, and low-income populations, and sometimes veterans. So this inclusion of youth is great because of this very issue. I've just never understood it. I've studied school transportation for a long time, and Nori McDonald has done such a great amount of work in this area for a long, long time. But the disassociation of education, transportation from the regular transportation system is bizarre, and that's a tangent now we're going off on. But again, like circling back to that Washington Post article, and then some of the questions that are here, like what is absent? What are you missing? What opportunities do you no longer have because of a transportation burden?
So I have been working in the Central Valley to implement microtransit service, and the Fresno Bee just did a story where they were interviewing people who now have access to this microtransit service, and we're using small electric vehicles. And really, it was every person. The goal of the service is get people to healthcare appointments, to schools. We are partnering with college, community colleges, healthcare appointments, court, all these places that people need to go. And I think, though, one of the major issues we're facing is the cost per ride is still pretty high because there's long distances to travel, and people can really only afford like $1, $2 a ride. So we're kind of coming up on, there's all these requirements for fare recovery, or we're thinking, we're partnering with nonprofits to get around that. So I think beyond these questions, I know, Jeff, you were getting into the questions, but we need to think more generally about transportation insecurity and how we're funding it, and how we're what are the regulations that will allow us to implement these more innovative pilot, or like you're saying, Tracy, the disconnect between transportation and education. I mean, some cities use public transportation to transport kids, some provide nothing.
And some school districts are their transportation agency, and
that's like the biggest budget item.
Yeah,
kind of all wraps up into this discussion, and I keep bringing this up because I think it's just so important. And actually, I'm actually replaying this episode on Christmas, but the one we had with Carl Martins about transport justice, it keeps playing over and over in my head this whole year ever since I've chatted with him. But there's something to be said about thinking about transportation insecurity in light of how the systems are created and who they're created for specifically. And if we go to that his idea, and it's basically Rawls's veil of ignorance idea, I think that the way of thinking about that is particularly beneficial. And which basically he's saying, if you go to an island and you nobody has any preconceived or understanding of what's on the island, and you could either be, you either have low resources or you have high resources, but you don't know yet, how would you design a transportation system under that veil of ignorance, right? So basically, you'd want to design a transportation system that works for everybody, because if you get onto the other side of that veil and you are low resources, you'd want to get around. And so I think thinking about it that way, and how you want to design transportation systems ahead of time fits into this idea of transport insecurity so well, because you're trying to design a system that works for everybody, that can get everybody to where they need to go. And I think part of Chrissy, what you're talking about in terms of the high costs and the fare recovery ratios and all that stuff, that's because we've designed a system that is only for a certain amount of people rather than for everybody.
It's designed for the privileged by the privileged.
Right. So, we have to think about it in this other way, and these questions start to get at that other way, and actually can educate people on why we should start thinking about it differently. And, one of the things that when I first read this article and I wanted to share it with everybody in the newsletter, and I wanted to talk about it on the show, was that I felt like if you shared this and with people who, don't necessarily think about transportation that often, would they be more inclined to think about it differently if they understood the things that people were going through and the lack of transportation that caused? I feel like a lot of people, they get in their cars and they have the windshield perspective and they're like, well, everybody's like me, I'm just driving around, I can get to everything. When in fact, that's not the case, right? And so if you give everybody an idea of what might be, the problem, which these 16 questions bring about, then I think you could change the conversation overall. It's the same thing I thought if somebody wanted to go through Carol's book, which I thought was a little bit of a slog, and I told him that on the show. If you wanted to go through that, it'll totally change your mind on what you think is fair transportation. And I think that's kind of what this piece and what this research is actually showing is that we need to look a little bit deeper, and even goes back to that data stuff we were talking about at the beginning. We need to go a little bit deeper about what it actually means to have access and have mobility, which I think is a really important reframing of the words, because as we talked to Peter Norton last week, mobility isn't just cars.
It's not the price of gas. It goes beyond that.
Exactly. So anyways, I sorry, I monologued a little bit there, but I thought that was really important to think about all of these things together. Transport justice and the insecurity, they're all in one. And if we share them with lawmakers, and I think if they even read little piece of the article, they might actually change their thinking.
The last thing I'll say about this article, and Amanda did a great job of highlighting it, is the methodical way they went through the development of this index, and to be able to, working from qualitative research to a large quantitative sample in order to have a validated index that people can use in various settings. So I think that's a really, again, another important aspect of the research that's been done by this team. So thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, she brought up one other point that I really wanted to mention is the H plus T index. And I still use H plus T, but I have just noticed that after we used it a lot during President Obama, of course, it might have gone away, but it hasn't come back in any federal grants. And it's surprising that the federal grants aren't requiring H plus T anymore. I don't know if you've seen that too, Tracy, but I still use it, but it's not, I haven't seen it as a requirement, even under President Biden.
Yeah, I haven't either.
I think they're working to try to, I think Scott specifically is working to try to get it back, but I don't know what the processes are, or there's a lot of stuff that disappeared under the Obama administration or after the Obama administration, I should say, that has not reappeared yet. And I'm wondering if it's just because of institutional knowledge, or because they don't want it to just disappear again at some point if it goes flip-flops. I don't know, because it is a useful tool, but it does have its shortcomings too, as many who created it will also tell you. But it's the best thing that we have for measuring that.
Maybe the focus of the administration under Biden right now, there's a huge push on aspects of equity and
justice
incorporating equity. Yeah, so maybe it'll come back in a different form in that way.
All right, let's move on. Water gets the recycling treatment. Around the American West, water is getting more scarce due to drought. To get more water from less, San Diego's Pure Water program is looking to get 40% of its water from local sources by 2035. In one program, wastewater is treated to the point where it's so pure you can't drink it until it's pumped back up with minerals. This was by Matt Simon and Mother Jones. So after reading this, I'm a little bit worried that I'll have the opposite worry about drinking wastewater, that it's too pure and it's going to leach all of the good minerals out of my body when I drink it, if they forget to put them back in. I don't know what you all thought about this, but I was like, okay, well, I'm not afraid now of drinking wastewater because there's quote unquote waste in it. I'm afraid of it because it's going to be too clean.
Yeah, I think it's going to be hard to convince people to want to drink wastewater.
Right.
So I think we need to flip and figure out conservation of just waste. I think we could probably do a poll right now of who wants to drink this wastewater in San Diego. I know. But no, I was thinking more when I was reading the article about our discussion on climate-proof Duluth and what are different states and cities doing to conserve water. And obviously in California, it's raining today, but we're under severe drought. Different cities have implemented, like in Marin, you can only use 55 gallons of water per day or else you get a fine. And, a load of laundry is 40 gallons. So that's a big deal. But even in the Midwest, so when I worked in Chicago, maybe 10 years ago in Chicago, we were working on water and stormwater policy. And we said, well, Chicago's very resilient. We don't need to do all of these things. We don't need to try and desalinate water or transform wastewater into drinking water because we have all this fresh water. Now, because of climate change, Chicago is experiencing a 100-year storm every year. and instead of every 100 years. So the Chicago River is flushing stormwater back into the lake. That brings sewage into the water there. So, it's not just on the coast or in the western part of the US. And then the other issue with climate change is because there's this noticeable difference in winter ice covering the lake, the sun's heat isn't reflecting as much off the ice. So the warmer water is evaporating faster. So that's reducing the lake's levels. The rest of the Chicago region, west of Chicago, is on an aquifer that's basically will be dry in 10 years by 2030. So those cities have to all figure out how to tap into like Michigan, which is billions of dollars in investments. So it's not just, as you're reading these articles, I think a lot of the articles focused on water and droughts. It focuses on the western part of the country, but I think places all over are experiencing this, all over the world, really.
Yeah, it's such a ubiquitous problem of water shortage and scarce because there's so much water on the earth, but there's such a limited amount of clean, non-salted, non-ocean water that we have access to, and we need it so much. I would also implore people to, if you don't do already, and I know, if you're a renter, you might not even have access to this information if your landlord just kind of passes through water bill to you every month, but just kind of check out like how much water you're actually using. So I know that for our water bills, you can see how much you're using and how much they tell you how much the average is for the state of California, which is like 60 gallons a day. And you can kind of see how much you're using per capita. It's 60 gallons per capita per day, which is it's a fair amount of water. And I thought we were using a lot just from doing dishes and laundry. And Chris, you said 40 gallons. That's a lot of water is 40 gallons for, and then the showers and all that stuff. So, if you start to add all that stuff up, it gets to be a lot of gallons of water. And we have, at some point, I think soon, if this rain that we're having now and in October didn't cause, an amazing amount of water, we're going to have to go through restrictions. And just understanding how much water you actually use could be key to maybe doing little things maybe flushing after the second time you pee rather than the first time. Those little things actually add up over time, and I think it's something that I hadn't thought of much when I was at my old place, because just I didn't see the bill very much, but we see the bill and it tells you kind of what you use and how you use it. And it's just interesting to think about, especially in light of all the things that are happening with the droughts in the West Coast or even water scarcity all over the world.
Well, and it highlights a lot of things. And like we said, what I said before we started recording, there's a lot of public health. There's a public health theme throughout all these stories. And one of the things about public health, and I'm thinking about the social ecological model in terms of it's not just one thing that will address an issue. And this article and the plastics article or the recycling online shopping article talked about it, whether it's reduction of use, change, trying to find new sources to put new water into the system, addressing remediation, mitigation, and we have to have multiple solutions to address the issue and to hopefully bring about behavior change to try to put more, in this case, water back into the system and not use as much as we are in terms of consumers of water.
Yeah, and that gets back to thinking about the alignment with the transportation insecurity and water insecurity and just fairness and how we distribute water and how we now are going to fine people who use too much water. Maybe if you are a wealthier person in Marin County, you can afford the fine. And I think the average fee for someone going over 55 gallons is like $50 a month. But what about, how are we going to structure that for low income? Are we going to use some kind of income-based or circuit breaker-based way to assess these fees over the long term? I don't think that's been considered yet, but you can't restrict water. People need water. So how do you allocate it and pay for it and assess fees if you overconsume so that it's fair?
I was just thinking, I was just thinking about Prop 13 and property taxes and finite resource of land, right? Like there's a finite resource of water and there's a finite resource of land. And so there's probably a good way to regulate it and a bad way to regulate it, right? So that, people who already have money and they're more than happy to pay the penalties, but then they use more water than they really should be having access to. And they don't care, but they're taking away the there's like I said, there's a finite resource, and so they're taking away from everybody else if they do. And a $500 fine, which I've heard is a number that's been thrown out there, $50 for rate increase for if you reach a certain amount, those types of things. Those aren't going to deter anybody who makes hundreds of millions of dollars a year, or some of these major water users, which the San Francisco Chronicle and other papers have in the Bay Area at least have done. They've done stories in the last few years about these mega users who just don't care about the fines. They don't. It doesn't matter to them because ultimately they have enough money or more money than they know what to do with, and so they don't care. But that finite resource, you have to protect it so that everybody has access to water.
Yeah, and even there's the fines, but then there's also the infrastructure to connect. So Joliet, Illinois is connecting into the Lake Michigan water system. It has to connect to Chicago, and their water bills are going to triple because someone has to pay for all those stores. I think I once had a conversation with T. Boone Pickens, who's the oil tycoon.
I think
no
he passed
comment
recently. I think he passed.
Yeah,
recently.
he did.
Yeah.
But during our conversation, he told me at the time, which was probably about a decade ago, he was buying up all the land with water rights in the West because it was worth more than oil.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a big booster of Oklahoma State. Basically, everything was named after him.
Yeah.
The university. All right, let's move on to food carts, shall we? Los Angeles food cart design gets approval. For years, food vendors in LA have sought approval for a cart design from the LA County Department of Health, even protesting outside City Hall because of onerous standards. Now, a design to vend tamales by Richard Gomez has been approved, offering hope for other innovations in the space. This was by Carolina A. Miranda at the Los Angeles Times. So this is for a tamale cart. It's not for all carts, but it's called the Tamalero. Tamalero? Does that sound right? Tamalero?
Yes.
The Tamalero, which, like I said, not all food carts, it's just approved for tamales. And so they're going to work on another one so that they can do meats. Like, the people who are given, who sell those hot dogs after hours.
Sonora dogs.
Sonora dogs? Is that what you call them?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Is that what they're called?
I think they have many different names. But that sounds appropriate. But this vehicle, it's I call it a vehicle. Cart. It's a cool design. It kind of reminds me of like a 50s car, like crossed with some Art Deco a little bit in there. Some 20s action. I don't know. What do you all think about this cart design and the process for it?
I think it's great. I mean, it was a really good and fascinating article to learn about just the amount of hoops that have to be jumped through in order for that to happen. And I mean, it made me think about, food carts in New York City, like the hot dog carts and pretzel carts on every corner, and like, what is the difference there? But I also do like that. I mean, it was important to him that there was an aesthetic to the cart as well in terms of broad cultural acceptance and desire around having that product be out on the street.
Yeah, and thinking about the hoops, what stood out to me in the article, and this is where I think the policy and regulations, it's really, you have such power there when you know the code and why the aesthetic and how thinking about what is the aesthetic that the vendors want to see. There's no alternative for having diverse backgrounds and experiences in government and in leadership positions. And you have this, the designer and the engineer, Richard Gomez. He immigrated from Mexico. He's been working as an engineer for a bunch of different types of trucks because that's what his father did when he came to the US. And eventually he moves to working with food trucks. And he looked at, well, what are my experiences as an immigrant of working with nonprofits in the community that were advocating for sidewalk vendor rights. And he saw this problem. And he says in the article, when they got him to, open up a little bit more about his personal story, was, he's wanted to be involved in crafting changes to the code because of all these, when LA legalized sidewalk vending in 2018, and, he saw that the code is how you can make change. And if you can work around the code or change the code, you can make change in your community and make change. And how much just simply designing a food truck but designing this food truck that people can actually use and start a business is how you make change, but it starts with understanding the code and how to work around it.
Yeah, back to that like idea of the upstream
Mm-hmm.
solutions or things that have to change.
It's crazy how much we design things to the T for a certain way of doing things. So in this instance, like brick and mortar restaurants, right? We were thinking about public health. You're thinking about food safety, all those things as it pertains to a restaurant, which is really important. Don't get me wrong, because you don't want people dying from your food. But at the same time, like you have to be a little bit less rigid in thinking about, how this impacts like smaller vendors and people who are just trying to start out. I mean, the big thing that I even $7,500 for this cart is a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's not a food truck, which is going to be $150,000, which is another big expense, but that's way less than the, several $100,000 to $1 million you're going to do a restaurant. So all these levels of bureaucracy that people have to go through just to start a business, it's really, it's really makes it hard for people to innovate, to think of something new. And I can't help but think that if the standards were less onerous on, for the food carts, they're still safe, but they rethought them in a way that continued to allow them to be safe, but they didn't make them be basically mini restaurants. It would probably be better off, and there'd probably be more carts and people vending, and I think that there's probably a little bit of we don't want them to be vending because we're protecting territory for brick and mortar restaurants, et cetera. I think they've had that fight because of the food trucks as well. They don't want people just to randomly park their food truck somewhere where they paid a lot of money to buy the restaurant next door. But I think that there's something to be said for innovation and letting people figure it out. And I'm just the frustration, here the quote that I pulled from the article: does a bacon dog vendor really require 12 cubic feet of refrigeration and a 3-compartment sink? That's just like, no, they don't. You can still keep food safe and be healthy without having all these onerous requirements.
Agreed.
Nice. Well, let's talk about Christmas markets, shall we?
Yes.
Awesome. Last one. The significance of Germany's Christmas markets. In Germany, there are usually several thousand Christmas markets open in December, but the pandemic has paused these spaces, which date back to medieval times. The absence of the markets has prompted historians to recommend them for UNESCO's Intangible Cultural Heritage List. This was by Amy McKeever in National Geographic. And so in Germany alone, there are normally between 2,500 and 3,000 Christmas markets per year. Have you all ever been to a German Christmas market?
Not in Germany, no.
Oh man, it's crazy, amazing. So when my parents lived in the Netherlands, we went to Heidelberg for Christmas. We stayed in Heidelberg for a couple of days. Just kind of took a train trip from Rotterdam to Heidelberg, and the first day we were there, the market was still going on, and basically the central square was just all like vendors, and there were Santa Clauses climbing up the walls of these churches and buildings, and like all the decorations around, you could smell it. It was just this really impressive scene, and at the time, I didn't really tie it to that this is like a thing that happens all over Germany. I thought this was maybe just like Heidelberg's thing, but apparently it goes on in 3,000 different spaces around the country, and it's really an amazing experience. The history of it is really fascinating too. I mean, they've been having these things since the 15th and 16th centuries, so they've been going on for quite a while, and I can see why they would want it to be a cultural heritage, connection to the country. To me, it wasn't just about religion and Christmas and those types of things. And everybody in the article you read, you can see that everybody's trying to like kind of take it on as their own thing, whether you're pagan or you're, even Nazis. They were trying to remake them in their own image. But it's actually just like this cultural phenomenon that happens in December because it's super cold. It gets dark early, and you should have something to do that's super fun and gets the community together. I just found there's something to be said about that.
Yeah, I loved how Amy McKeever, she was writing about how the pandemic interrupted the holiday markets and just how we've all experienced that, because like Chicago has a big German Christmas market downtown, and even in the cold, your hands are freezing, but you're drinking beer out of a boot, and it's just like so fun, and everyone's, it's like a joyous place to be, and you smell the roasted peanuts, and yeah, it's just something that you experience. And over the past or 2 weeks ago, we went to Fort Mason to get our Christmas tree, and that's not a Christmas market, but there's this whole production that the guardsmen do at Fort Mason for charity. And, last year when we went to get the tree, we couldn't even get out of the car. If you drove in, they threw the tree on your hood. If you walked in, you could get your tree, like you had to stay 6 feet away. But then this year they had a little bit more, you can go inside, and there was a little market inside. And, it just reminded me of how much we've missed. And you just can't recreate that, and how much that cultural phenomenon, that the holidays bring, even though not everyone experiences joy during the holidays, but,
True.
Just seeing Christmas trees or a menorah and windows, or, whatever it is, it just feels like there's this sense of community and tradition. And, we've just missed out on so much of that over the past 2 years, but it feels like it's coming back.
They're a nice tradition, and I enjoyed the little bit of time. We went to Vienna. We were in Vienna shortly after the Christmas holiday, January 2000. We were there. Actually, we were worried about Y2K things. But it was,
if only.
That's when I was in Heidelberg. Is like the 1999 2000 kind of over time. Yeah, the same time. So we were not very far away in Europe.
That's right. Yeah. We had a little bit of remnant of it, so that was my closest experience to it. But it seems like just a nice tradition. And again, just hearkening back, as you said, Chrissy, to traditions that happen around certain times of the year, and hoping to hold on to them.
Another thing I think it adds to is kind of that idea that we're all we're on Zoom right now actually, but and it was always nice when folks could come over here to the studio and hang out, but it kind of makes people realize that you can't do everything virtually. You can have happy hours virtually, I think, kind of, but it doesn't really match. It doesn't really match what the real thing is. Going to the theater to watch a movie is a different experience than watching it from home. Even though you can just pause it and go to the bathroom whenever you want, not worry about missing anything. I think those experiences, a couple of weeks ago we were supposed to go and we missed out on it, unfortunately, because something happened. But, there's all these like really cool craft fairs and things like that you can go to Fort Mason or wherever else, and they're super fun. And you just can't do that by shopping online. So there's these communal experiences, even the farmers market, the Ferry Building, for example. There's all these communal experiences, I think, like that the Christmas markets kind of represent overall. It's not just the Christmas market itself, but it's just kind of this getting together as humanity and enjoying something together rather than separately. And I think there's something beneficial from that perspective. And it might, this article focuses on Christmas markets, but it could be a larger story about preserving the ability to connect with humans.
Yeah. The last piece in our public health story, our theme for the week.
That's right.
Social connectedness.
Connecting with humans, social connections. All right. Well, this week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways really wouldn't be here without it, so thank you very much. And you can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. We've had people sign up each month during the pandemic, and we're super appreciative of that. $2 a month and you get some stickers, and $10 a month will get you your bus-only scarf. And now, because we're sold out of scarves, that's the only way you can get a scarf. I have several left over for Patreon supporters if they sign up, but otherwise I've sold out of the scarf. So we're going to have to design a new one. And
is there a secondary market for the scarves now?
I don't know. Maybe like if you go on eBay, you might find a scarf for like, $1 million. It might be there. I don't know. But I did notice. So we sold these streetcar books a number of years ago, Street Smart Streetcars in the American City or something like that's the title, Reconnecting America. And I noticed, and I went online, and obviously you can't buy them at stores anymore. And I went online, and somebody was selling it for like $300. I was like,
oh my gosh,
that's crazy! Like just this book, I'm like, man, I had the gold mine. I have like 6 of them because they were sitting in the archive when I got all my books from my office. So it's kind of funny.
Did you see that on Amazon?
It wasn't on Amazon. It was somewhere else. It was like Abe Books or something like that. Those book resellers.
It's funny.
Well, I just read this article about an author who, on Amazon, certain sellers can just basically hold books and charge whatever they want. And this author was saying he tried to buy his book on it, and on Amazon, and the price is $1,000. It was some crazy price, because Amazon doesn't regulate the price of the book. So if there's only one seller, they can sell for however much they want.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, that it's probably not just Amazon. It's just probably booksellers. I mean, all over. There's ABE books, ABE books. I think a lot of their books are like, they're very rare, or they got them out of libraries because there was only one copy left in the library, or some libraries have them, and then the libraries, they're like, nobody checks this book out, so we're going to sell it to you for pennies. I know the San Francisco Public Library at Fort Mason actually has a place where you can actually buy some of their old books. And so probably somebody can go down there and pick up a bunch of them. I think I found a Frank Lloyd Wright book that had a really cool cutout thing. But it's probably one of those things where, they could probably sell them online. And if somebody wants to pay, $1,000, they'll pay $1,000 for a book that they want. So that's crazy that happens. But I don't think the scarves have gotten there quite yet.
Well, I'll have to see if somebody wants to buy my scarf, since I don't get much use for it here. And then Ryan and I want to push you to do the cooling towel.
The cooling towel, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
in
The
spring,
chamois
summer.
kind of the cooling, yeah.
Yeah.
That might be that might be on the list of things to do. Okay, puppies and butterflies. This is part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe it just didn't fit in the other sections. Anybody have some puppies and butterflies for today?
I don't know if you saw the sidewalk robots in Estonia that got stuck in the snow.
I did see that.
Well, because I've been, working on these delivery issues. And when I saw that, I just thought, clearly no one has thought about who's going to shovel the sidewalks. It's the property manager, all these issues that come up. But I just think these cute little robots, and they are obstructing the sidewalks, so that's an issue. So we're not going to talk about that. But these little robots that are like, you just see them kind of falling over.
Didn't I think I read somewhere or that they have like a two-way radio, and so somebody was like talking through the robot, like, help me, to try to get them to flip them over.
Clearly designed by someone who's never actually worked for government or like walked on a sidewalk.
At least in a winter
Estonia,
place,
in the
right?
winter, yeah.
That's crazy. Tracy, do you have puppies and butterflies?
I don't have a puppies and butterflies. All I have is a story about a very little butterfly that was at my house. An actual butterfly. It was the smallest butterfly I've ever seen, and it was bright green. And that's my butterfly story. That's it. It was beautiful.
I did see a butterfly story. I think the monarchs, we were worried.
Yeah.
We were worried about them like disappearing, and then somebody found where they were, and it was inland further because of climate change. And so there's a ton of them, I guess, not on the coast anymore. They're on inland, and so apparently they figured out a way to reproduce, and the numbers are way up, which was good. I mean, not to where they were, obviously, but at least they're not dying. At least they're not gone.
Interesting.
So
my
was
mom
really
was
cool.
like, "That has to be your butterfly story." The butterflies are back. So thanks for bringing it up, Jeff.
No problem. Well, my puppies and butterflies is just general, like, holiday spirit stuff, like putting lights on the front bushes and putting up the tree and doing all that stuff. So it's been fun to kind of like decorate a little bit and just kind of spread a little bit cheer with a couple of colors on the bushes.
Is this your first holiday season in?
Yes, it is.
That's nice. It's nice. It's like an extra element.
It is. Before I wasn't really decorating much because, I decorated in the house, but not outside the house because it wasn't my house. And so we didn't put up much lights and things outside. And so now I can do that. I take advantage of it. I took advantage of it at Halloween, and we put up orange lights outside. And then we're taking advantage of it here and putting up lights. We have like two like posts out the front that kind of hold up the overhang over the steps, and so I wrapped it with lights and put those down to the bushes, and so it's pretty fun, like doing that, and then putting up like I have a couple of snowflakes in the window too. That's cool, and then we did the tree, which is in the window too. So it's super fun. Just nerding out, doing that type of thing, going to Home Depot and seeing what lights they have,
What colors?
all the colors.
Well, my whole neighborhood is all white.
They do
lights.
all white lights?
So I
Nice.
put
You put some color. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes I find that the all white lights, it's pretty, but it's also kind of like bland. It needs.
It does. Yeah, it looks pretty, but I don't know. I just wanted to
Yeah.
mix it up.
Yeah. Now they have those LED lights. You can
You can
do a lot
change
with
it,
them.
yeah.
Change it up. So it's been fun, super fun. All right. Well, where can folks find you online? We'll do Tracy and then Chrissy.
They can find me mostly on Twitter at TE McMillan.
And I'm at Mancini Chrissy on Twitter and mycuriouscity.com.
Awesome. And you can find me on Twitter at The Overhead Wire or at theoverheadwire.com. Thanks for joining us at Mondays at The Overhead Wire. Thanks to our generous patrons for sponsoring this week's podcast. Nice end of the year to have you all here. Appreciate you, as always, coming on the show.
Yes. Cheers.
Cheers.
Happy New Year.
Yes, Happy New Year to everybody. We'll be back after the New Year, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Talk